Bene, buon pomeriggio a tutte e a tutti. Come sempre chiedo di spegnere la camera e il microfono a tutti i partecipanti prima di iniziare questo nuovo seminario della serie dei seminari SIAC 2020-2021.
Bene, buon pomeriggio a tutte e a tutti.
Scusate, c'è un ritorno.
Come sempre chiedo di spegnere la camera e il microfono a tutti i partecipanti.
Ok. Chiedo a questo punto a Dorothy Zin di palesarsi per iniziare il seminario. Prego, Dorothy.
Grazie, Francesco. Thank you. Have we admitted everybody who needs to be admitted so far? I'll switch to English now. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Looks like
Turn the camera, Dorothy.
I did turn the camera on. It's not showing.
Yes, I can see her.
Okay. Play.
So should we wait another minute to actually begin, or shall we go ahead and?
If you want.
Okay.
Annelien can switch her camera on.
All right. So welcome everyone today to the latest of our SIAC webinars. The topic of this week's presentation is the Wenner-Gren Foundation, Opportunities and Support for Anthropological Research. I welcome everyone also on behalf of SIAC's president, Ferdinando Mirizzi, who's been detained in a departmental meeting, but will be joining us. I also want to wish all of our fathers in the audience happy Father's Day, because today is Father's Day in Italy, St. Joseph. It's our pleasure, great honor and pleasure today to have with us Dr. Danilyn Rutherford of the Wenner-Gren Foundation in the United States. And I will say a few words about this webinar in the context of the activities of SIAC and why we decided to organize this. SIAC is a generalist association of anthropology in Italy, promoting anthropology in academia, but also in professional and public contexts. And last year, in late spring, early summer, with the situation of the pandemic, we decided to launch a series of webinars to reflect on various aspects of how the pandemic was affecting our anthropological practice. So we began with the first few webinars about the changes in research getting disrupted due to the pandemic, how it was affecting our teaching and our relationships, having to maintain distance from people, which is very antithetical to an ethnographic approach. And then we ended up broadening later to topics of interest more generally to Italian anthropologists. So anthropology's role in the public sphere and how to communicate anthropology. Our recent webinar on research ethics regarding the new European data protection law. I do want to mention that our next webinar, as a kind of trailer, on April 28th, we're going to have our webinar on teaching anthropology, education about anthropology, and training in anthropology. So all of these things that come under the heading in Italian of formazione. And that's going to be coordinated by my colleague Caterina Di Pasquale. And we have several colleagues who have guaranteed their presence for that. So it will be a very interesting discussion about various aspects of education, teaching, and training. And that's April 28th at 4:30 p.m. So today's webinar, again, is in the spirit of service to Italian anthropology, whether people are actually SIAC members or not. We thought it was really a great opportunity to bring in Dr. Rutherford to talk about Wenner-Gren and the kinds of funding programs that they offer. Now, this might be useful also for Dr. Rutherford to keep in mind. In Italy, traditionally, alongside some ethnological missions to certain areas, so in Africa, in East Africa we had, in West Africa, and in Mexico, for example, we've had some ethnological missions that had some funding. A significant part of anthropological research in Italy has been very, very low budget and anthropology at home, partly due to that. It's what our colleague Bernardino Palumbo has called fieldwork Italian style. The research funds were perhaps those that were just available to professors from their own institutions or PhD students who had scholarships, etc. And compared to the US, the UK, we have very few foundations and other organizations that support anthropological research that we can apply to. The Italian ministry has a very large funding scheme for all types of research. And so I have to say we've been fairly lucky as anthropologists the last few years. We've managed to secure some funding through these, the PRIN programs, but you know, it's difficult because we do compete against the other disciplines. I'd say that there's been a transformation in Italy, in Italian anthropology in particular, in part due to the increased audit culture measures that are prioritizing third-party funding in the evaluation of research careers and the evaluation of departments, for example. So universities are pushing strongly for this. And all of this has meant that there's a greater attention now to seeking out funding sources, writing competitive applications to do research. And when we were in the early stages of organizing this webinar, we discovered that Italy was amongst the countries with the lowest rates of applications to Wenner-Gren programs. So we're extremely pleased to have Dr. Rutherford here on behalf of Wenner-Gren. I understand, and I'm sure you'll talk generally about Wenner-Gren's mission, but one of the things that I know Wenner-Gren does is support a diversification of anthropologies. And considering that in Italy we do have a tradition that is amongst the, we could say, non-hegemonic anthropologies, it's really nice to have your presence here to give us some support. So without further ado, I would like to say that Dr. Rutherford is herself an anthropologist who has a long experience in the academic world, teaching at the institutions like the University of Chicago and the University of California, Santa Cruz. She has a research expertise on Southeast Asia, in particular West Papua, but also some very wide-ranging interests in the field of anthropology. And since 2017, she has been president of the Wenner-Gren Foundation. Before I pass the microphone to Danilin, I do want to ask everyone, please, to keep the microphones turned off during the presentation. Afterwards, we will have an open question and answer session, and I would like you to raise your hands with the raise your hand function Preferably, you can also write things in the chat if you're not comfortable with that, but it's more helpful for us to have the raised hands because we can also better judge the order of the questions. But we'll reserve those for after the presentation. So without any further ado, thank you, Danilin, for being with us, and I hand the floor over to you.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction and for the information about the funding landscape in Italy. That's, interesting and useful for me to hear. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Wenner-Gren Foundation. I'm going to talk a bit about how we're facing the current moment, explain our review process, go over our project description questions, and tell you a little bit about all of our programs, including some new ones. I'm going to focus mostly on the dissertation fieldwork and post-PhD research grant programs, which should be open to everyone in your group, but I welcome questions about any and all of our programs, basically about anything we do. And I'm really very excited to reach out in hopes of having more of you apply. So this is, on the one hand, I'll be covering sort of the history and philosophy of Wenner-Gren, but I also want to give you just some nuts and bolts advice on how to succeed in our major grant competitions. So, and I'm really looking forward to all of your questions. So I'm going to share my screen because I have some images. So, yeah, and this is the alternative title. Obviously with the pandemic, the funding of anthropological research and the doing of anthropological research has changed. So some of my reflections are going to reflect, what our thinking has been about how to proceed in this current moment. The Wenner-Gren Foundation was created by two men who actually knew very little about the discipline. One of these men was Axel Wenner-Gren, the founder of the Electrolux Corporation, a Swedish magnate, one of the richest men in the world at the time. In 1941, when he created the foundation. He created the Wenner-Gren Foundation originally as the Viking Fund after selling one of his yachts in Florida. And he needed a place to put the money where he would not have to pay US taxes. Okay, so this is one of his yachts. It was a different yacht that he had to sell. This was his yacht, the Southern Cross, that formerly had belonged to Howard Hughes. Basically, the Wenner-Gren Foundation was originally founded for the benefit of anything and everything. It had a very broad mission, but it was this man, the man on the far right, Paul Feos, who was a Hungarian avant-garde filmmaker who convinced Wenner-Gren to use the foundation to support anthropology. Now, Paul Feos was quite an interesting character. A filmmaker. His original film in Hollywood was a silent movie about the last 5 minutes of the life of a man who was killing himself by drowning. He had trouble succeeding a second time in Hollywood. He moved to Copenhagen, where he worked for the Danish Film Corporation. And then he got this idea that he wanted to make ethnographic films. So he was completely an amateur, but he was the one who developed this interest in anthropology and convinced Wenner-Gren to use the money to support it. Feos was also something of a pathological liar. He used to tell people that he met Axel Wenner-Gren when he saved him from being eaten by a tiger on a big game hunt. In fact, it's more likely that the two of them met on Wenner-Gren's yacht in Singapore. So he talked Wenner-Gren into supporting anthropology in the first instance to fund an amateur archaeology expedition to Peru that the two men went on. Now, I'd like to tell this story in part just to make the point that it's a grand historical accident that the Wenner-Gren Foundation for Anthropological Research exists. And I think those of us who work for the foundation, who support the foundation as reviewers and advisors, we really feel a great deal of responsibility that springs from that fact. We're here to support anthropology worldwide. We're not constrained by our founders or by donors or by any government. the endowment is really for us as anthropologists worldwide. And this is our mission. We're committed to playing a leadership role in anthropology. We help anthropologists advance anthropological knowledge, build sustainable careers, and amplify the impact of anthropology within the wider world. And we dedicate ourselves to broadening the conversation in anthropology to reflect the full diversity of the field. And the way I think about it is, our role is to save anthropology, but also to make sure that anthropology is worth saving. Now, we have an endowment of around 165 million US dollars. We give away roughly $5.5 million a year. Most of that money goes towards our small research grants program. That's our dissertation fieldwork grant and our post-PhD research grants. We get roughly 1,500 proposals per year, and we're only able to fund 15% of those. So one of the first things to know about the Wenner-Gren Foundation is it's very, very difficult to get our funding. So if you do apply to us for support for your research and you don't receive a grant, you're allowed to feel bad for about a minute, but then you should pat yourself on the back because you're in really good company. There's so many extraordinary projects that we just don't have the resources to support. Now, we realize it's especially hard to be doing anthropological research and be seeking funding now because of what's happening in the world. And this is something that I felt very strongly personally, but also in my role at the foundation. I feel like this is really a watershed moment for the discipline. With COVID-19, climate change, structural inequality, the movement against racial injustice worldwide, it's really a moment of reckoning for our societies, but also for our discipline, which in many ways is long overdue. It seems to me that the work of anthropologists has never been more important than it is right now, but it's also a very difficult time to do this work. So we're really looking for ways that we can support researchers as we all face the challenges ahead. And I've been thinking a little bit about these challenges. And again, this came up in the midst of the sudden transformations in our operations that happened in March 2020, when we had to sort of figure out a way to support anthropologists at this moment when the world was going into lockdown. Now, one of those challenges I like to think about is the intellectual challenge. Grant proposals are always fictional. They're a story that one tells about something that one would like to do. They're fictive, okay? They indicate how in touch with the world and important issues an applicant is, and whether they're able to formulate a viable plan for exploring the world and these issues. They're written at a particular point in time. The things that we study as anthropologists have a temporality. Not everything in the world changes between November of one year and April of the next, but some things certainly do. So when we decide to fund someone, we're endorsing not only their project, but also that person as a thinker who's capable of coming up with anthropological ways of knowing the world. So that's something that's important to keep in mind if you are putting together a proposal for us. Now, the current times are placing demands on us as thinkers that are more extreme than usual. We're being asked to do things that are not bad things to do. They're demanding virtues that should always be part of our practice. We should always be flexible. We should always recognize that the world changes when we do research. But these moments, the moment that we're in, is really accentuating the need for that kind of flexibility. And the way I see it is it's a challenge to get beyond a narrow kind of empiricism. My former colleague at UC Santa Cruz, my Auntie Fernando, wrote a very nice essay in which she drew on Rolf Trio's insistence on the difference between an object of study and an object of observation. For my auntie, her object of study, or her object of observation, was the Muslim French people she worked with in Paris. Her object of study was French secularism and governmentality. Now, in this current moment, when it's so difficult to know exactly how we're going to be able to proceed with our research, we need to be able to zoom out to the broader phenomena that we want to explore and ask questions we can get at through multiple routes. Now, of course, the route you take changes the question. You need to be open to knowing as much as you possibly can before you get to the field, but also being open to knowing more. It's a unique challenge, I think, for researchers right now, but also a unique opportunity. One of the things that's really powerful about anthropological ways of knowing is precisely that flexibility, that we're able to be responsive to what we're learning and allow that to change the kinds of questions that we're asking. But we need to sort of come into research with a really broad sense of the phenomena that we want to explore and not be locked into one narrow question, which we may or may not be able to get at in the ways that we initially laid out. So it's an intellectual challenge. Okay. The second challenge, which is, a very obvious one, is the methodological challenge. And it sounds like, in these webinars, you've been talking about this quite a bit. I know everyone has in a way, the need to come up with research methods that are safe and ethical in the context of a pandemic. And again, for us, we're looking at proposals that came in at November 1st. Our next round will be proposals coming in at May 1st. We have no idea what next fall is going to look like worldwide. Vaccinations are rolling out, new variants are arising. It's really hard to know what the conditions of research are going to be like. And, as one of our reviewers pointed out early in the process, fieldwork is really the opposite of social distancing. When you think about it, the point of doing fieldwork is to move between spaces and between communities and have intimate, conversations with people of all kinds. It's a wonderful way to spread a virus, right? So we've really had to rethink how we go about what we do. If you apply to us in May, there's a chance you'll be able to resume face-to-face methods by the time you receive our grant, but there's also a chance you won't. So we really need to be ready for that eventuality. Yael Navarro, who was one of our reviewers and a colleague, did a commentary for us. We did a series of blog posts precisely on the challenges of doing anthropology in the pandemic. And in her post, she talked about the Danny Miller YouTube video that circulated early on, how to conduct ethnography during social isolation. And as Yael saw it, Danny Miller was espousing a can-do philosophy that we can still go ahead and do ethnography through virtual means. But she felt it's also important to pay homage to what we can't do. How is the field, how are people doing research right now going to grapple with what's lost, with the loss of the kind of first-person experience so much anthropological research has depended on. And her, response to this was the online alone is not an answer. And I agree with her there. But I think you could take that position even further, that this moment has been a chance to reflect more critically on the conditions that make the first person approach to research possible, that this can't do moment maybe should lead us to think about things that we don't always do, but we should, things that researchers now are being forced to do and have an opportunity to do. It's a bunch of things that are often overlooked in the rush to face-to-face interviews and the kind of fiction of unmediated access to information that comes with that. One of those things is developing contextual knowledge, really thinking carefully about the context in which you're working, developing comparative knowledge, thinking about what researchers and other sites have learned about comparable phenomenon, developing historical knowledge, having a deep historical sense of the place where you're going to be working, but also the tools that you're bringing in, your own intellectual genealogy. Learning from other researchers' data sets. In talking to archaeologists, I've had these conversations often that, there are these data sets out there that just never get used. There are field notes and archives that don't get consulted. This is something that we could be doing now. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, learning to be an ally or a critic, by learning from other allies or critics beyond academia, really broadening our conversations. These are all things that are important to do. I had some experience of this myself. I work in, or have historically worked in West Papua, which is a part of Indonesia where no one had gotten a permit to do research since 1965 when I set out. And I really was not sure I was going to be able to travel there. I'd lived in Indonesia before, so I had some contextual knowledge, but it was unclear. So I had to design my dissertation project with a very heavy archival component. And in the end, I had to, I did that archival research for 6 months before, I ended up getting to the field. I was living in Europe at the time. It would have been a really different study if I hadn't kind of done that archival research first, because when I got there, I was in conversation with people in Biak who were themselves historians, non-academic historians, but historians nonetheless. Some of them had consulted some of the documents and known the writers of the documents that I'd been reading. I was able to have much more sophisticated conversations with them than I would have had if I had just stumbled in without doing that kind of background research. So I think that it's not necessarily a bad thing to pause before one heads to the field and really learn what one can before one gets there. And that kind of takes me to the third challenge, which is what I think is the most important one in many ways. This kind of can't do moment also brings to light a problematic assumption that's long been present in many European and North American traditions of anthropology, especially I think in North America, this notion that anthropologists should be free to go wherever and talk to whomever, and there's little cost of entry. It seems to me that perhaps there should be. Assuming that you can go in and simply interview people, wasting their time learning things you could have learned before arriving reflects a particular kind of arrogance. And it seems like this is an opportunity to address it. And there are correlates of this across the subfields. We fund archaeologists, we fund biological anthropologists. There are correlates there too. In archaeology, there's this big emphasis on being able to do a new excavation. You're actually digging up people's ancestors and heritage. You really need to think about, why are you doing this? Is this ethical to do? The cost to participants of our research needs to be recognized. Part of the cost is the risks of the pandemic, but there are other costs too. We need to really openly deal with the risks that are involved in doing research, not just to the people we might interview or from whom, if you're one of these other kinds of anthropologists, you take samples, but everyone involved in getting you to the place. Okay, these issues are always there, but they're have been easily overlooked. It seemed like even more than this, it's a moment that we need to think broadly. If you're involving people in research remotely, they're actually putting a lot of time into helping you with your project. You need to be sure that the questions that you're asking are meaningful, not just to your fellow anthropologists, but also to the people who are involved in your work. Thinking not just about what you can do in this moment, but why it's worth being done. So I think that kind of moment of reckoning for the field is really important. So that's my sermon, again, just sharing some of the things we've been thinking about as we've moved forward in this new world. I want to talk a little bit about our review process for the dissertation fieldwork and post-PhD research grants, where again, we receive a very large number of applications. For these two programs, we have a two-stage review process. The first stage is a screening stage where every application is read by one reviewer and ranked on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 means definitely move forward for further review. 5 is definitely decline at this stage. At that stage, we roughly cut the pool in half. We end up moving forward all of the applications that are ranked 1 or 2 and many that are ranked 3. At that point, we take into account our mission. And if there are 2 applications that are more or less equivalent in the feedback and the responses, but one is from an applicant outside of North America and even more outside of the global North, we'd be inclined to pass that one on. We also think about resubmissions at that stage. If we feel like this particular applicant could benefit from getting further feedback, we might pass on the application at that stage. And, I know it just said like, okay, you apply for us and you don't get it, you feel bad for 30 seconds, you pat yourself on the back. If you apply and get declined at stage 1, at the screening stage, you also are allowed to feel bad for about 30 seconds. And then you should congratulate yourself, because we do turn down a lot of exceptional projects at this point. It's often because our reviewer is able to see something in the proposal that will clearly make it less competitive in stage 2 in an otherwise extraordinary project. Often some of the most exciting projects get turned down at stage 1 just because they're not yet in a stage of development that will make them competitive. It might be that someone has a really exciting research question, but they haven't figured out the methods for going about addressing it. Or they have just a great general topic, but they have 8 questions, not 1 question. They haven't yet figured out what the center of gravity is for their project. So for those reasons, you might get turned down, but please don't lose heart. We try to provide very extensive feedback at that stage. And, often if a reviewer is able to identify something about the proposal that you're able to remedy, you'll be in a good position. You'll have enough time to revise so you can resubmit for the next deadline. Okay, so stage 2, the ones that make it to stage 2 are read by 3 reviewers. Each is ranked on a scale of 1 to 5. At that point, we fund roughly 30%. Proposals that are ranked 2 and lower are pretty much automatically funded. Proposals that are ranked 2.7 on average and above are pretty much automatically declined. We fund as many of the 2.3s as we can. And again, in an all things equal situation, we do think about our mission of fostering inclusion within the field. So we will look at applicants who are based in institutions in the global south and would give them priority over global north, outside of the US over based inside of the US. So that's a point at which we're kind of thinking about our mission as well. We have some wiggle room internally at that point. Okay, so let me say a little bit about what we're looking for, or what our reviewers are looking for. Well, they're looking for projects that are going to move forward the conversation in anthropology, broadly understood. Again, I tell the story of our history in part just to make this point that it's an accident we're here. We're here for anthropology. We feel enormous commitment to using this resource to support conversations within anthropology. So projects where the findings are going to move forward the conversation. So how do you do that? Well, you have to have a proposal that's focused. You have to be asking a question that empirical research can answer. And the way I think about empirical research is very broadly. Empirical research means that you have certain assumptions about the world that you're willing to put at risk. You're willing to organize experiences for yourself that will prove that maybe you're wrong. And those experiences can range from doing media analysis to, literature reviews, to hanging out in bars and restaurants, to spending time in people's homes, to interviewing people, to taking samples and doing statistical analyses. They're all different kinds of experiences that you can organize for yourself that can prove your assumptions wrong. So those are the sorts of questions that we're looking for. Questions where, going out into the world will make a difference and we'll all learn something new as a result of it. So proposals need to be focused. They also need to be feasible. You need to be asking a question you can answer with the time and money available. Our grants are $20,000 US. The time for dissertation fieldwork, it's 12 to 18 months. For post-PhD, we can organize that according to the researcher. Often people will do it in phases. So again, it's roughly 12 to 18 months, either continuous or, during sort of discrete periods. So feasible. You can't ask too big a question. You have to ask the right size question for the amount of time and money that you have. And then the third part, which is very important, is the proposal needs to be legible. You can't have a broad impact on the field if only a handful of people can understand you. And I know that can be very difficult to do. I know, especially in my experience for North American anthropologists, it can be very hard. people get very enamored with their terminology. You know, people call it jargon. I call it terminology. You know, they get really enamored with their theoretical perspectives. You're also just enamored with your project. It's kind of like having a new puppy. Your new puppy is the best possible dog in the world simply because it's yours. Part of the work of writing an effective proposal is introducing your puppy to other people. So introducing your topic, showing people why it's so exciting and important to you. But also, if you're going to use specialist language, you know, that's okay, sparingly, but you need to introduce that language to other people. You need to help them understand why it's an important tool for you. We have a very international pool of reviewers. You have to understand that people may be reading your proposal coming from different traditions of anthropology. So really learning to write in a generous way that reaches people from different backgrounds, that's perhaps the most important thing about proposal writing. I mean, I happen to be a believer in the fact that the more clearly you write, the better you understand what you're saying. I know in my own work, as I've tried to kind of communicate more broadly my ideas, I've gotten a much cleaner sense of what it is I'm trying to say. So it's kind of, you know, developing, there are two real challenges in developing a proposal. One of them is figuring out what's at the heart of your interest, what's really the center of the project. The other challenge is just figuring out how to make it as communicable as possible to really kind of reach as many people as possible through the way you write about what you want to do. Okay, so that's sort of, yeah, in general terms, what our reviewers are looking for. I want to say a little bit about our project description questions and just walk you through. You know, there are lots of resources available on our website. I do a bunch of workshops like this, so you can look at a recording of it. I think this is being recorded too, so you can go back over. I also want to say I'm really open to answering email. You know, I can't like look at drafts of proposals, but if you have general questions about the process or about any of our programs, you know, you can always feel free to reach out. But I just want to sort of run through these questions real quickly, just to give you a sense of what we're looking for. So the first question is, describe the purpose of your research. What will be the focus of your investigation? What's your main research questions? What other questions will you need to answer to address it? And again, we have revised our questions slightly to fit COVID-19. You know, we're evaluating applications in the context of the pandemic. So formulate your research objectives clearly and carefully. Find a focus that will allow you to address your questions through a range of different avenues. Again, getting at this intellectual challenge in this first question. You want to work very hard on the first paragraph in your answer to this first question. It's probably what you'll draw upon for your abstract. We use the abstracts to assign reviewers, so they're very, very important. You want to begin with the big question that your research is going to address and then narrow down to the specific questions you're going to be asking. So starting broad and then going narrow. Okay, the second question. How does your research draw inspiration from existing scholarship in anthropology and other disciplines? Whose findings will you be building on? Give specific examples of the various lines of work with which you are in dialogue and which you are seeking to advance. I like to think of your answer to this question as the story of how you arrived at your research focus. You know, the story of how you arrived at the big question and the specific questions you want to ask, and then how you came up with your strategies for answering them. And here, you know, you want to think about what kinds of conversations you're going to be contributing to. You know, I like to think about scholarship in terms of conversations, you know, and one of the ways I think about this is if you're kind of, you know, back when we actually had parties and met in person, you might, you know, be at a party with people and come up to a group of people who are engaged in a conversation. You know, you don't just come up to that group and blurt whatever is on your head, you know, blurt out whatever it is you're thinking about at the moment. You want to listen to the conversation, but then you want to say something new, right? So in your answer to this question, you're showing what conversations am I listening to and how am I going to go about saying something new? Definitely using literature in a range of different languages is fine. Sadly, we don't have the capacity to accept applications in languages other than English at this point. But if you're drawing on, for example, a rich Italian tradition of literature around the topic you want to explore, definitely you want to use it in your answer to this question. But recognize that some of your reviewers may not be familiar with that tradition. So again, write generously. Tell us about the ideas that you're using. It's much more effective to actually be specific about the ideas of the people who you're talking about instead of just long lists of references, right? This is not supposed to be completely exhaustive. Rather, it's supposed to show what's your particular route through these conversations that have gotten you to the project that you're doing. So yeah, it's challenging, but again, really thinking about how it fits with question 1 is a good way to proceed. Okay. So then we come to the methods questions, okay? And these are a little bit complicated. This is how we're dealing with a pandemic. We're asking people to put together 2 different research designs. There's the plan A, which is what evidence will you need to collect, answer your research question? How will you go about collecting and analyzing this evidence? And here we're interested in the best case scenario, a description of your research activities should you be able to travel and meet with research participants and collaborators safely and ethically in person. Okay, so that's, again, one version of the answer. You'll also do a second version of the answer. Sorry about that. Plan B, we need to know you've developed a strategy that will allow you to address your research questions should the pandemic continue or worsen. If you're unable to travel or meet in person with research participants and collaborators, how will you address your research questions? What methods will you use to ensure that your research is safe and ethical should COVID-19 restrictions remain in place? So 2 different versions of the answer to this question. The way to approach both of them is to look at your answer to question 1, right? Where you laid out these questions that you want to address. And I'll often tell people, just take those questions and cut and paste them into your answer to project description 3, and then see if you can come up with methods for addressing them. It's a great way of making sure that your proposal is integrated. It's also a good way of testing, are you asking questions that empirical research can answer? If you can't come up with ways of addressing them, then maybe you need to rethink, what kinds of questions you're asking, in your research, right? You want to think broadly about methods, in both cases, archival work, comparative work, epistolary work, which is letters or journaling. I've attended a webinar with a fabulous Mexican anthropologist who works on women in prisons and sort of has used this really creative journaling project, to really work with that group. Existing field notes and data sets, gray literature, that term means just things that are not published in academic sources, but are nonetheless sources of important information, media analysis, museum collections, and then of course, online interviews and observations. So think about a full range of safe and ethical approaches that you might be able to use. And yeah, so, right. And we want to know, something about why you think these methods are going to be safe and ethical, given conditions in the place where you're planning to work. Okay, and that takes me to, and then feasibility, right? Access, and then ethics, the risk to participants, others affected by your research, and the debts to participants, the recognition of participants as co-producers of knowledge. Now, here's a moment where I can say something about the budget. We have changed the sorts of things that we're permitting in the budget. We permit a really broad array of items in people's budgets, including living expenses wherever you are. If you end up doing remote research, you can include in your budget the cost of rent and utilities and daily support for yourself as part of your budget. You can include research assistance, what we call gifts for informants, fair compensation for research participants who are helping you with your research and engaging in it with you, internet access for participants, equipment for participants. We funded cell phones for research participants, transcription, translation, reproduction costs, postage childcare, all of these things can be part of your budget. In addition to if you are ending up doing face-to-face research, say you're doing something that requires specialized training, we've provided funds for scuba training for people who are working on, coral reef restoration projects. So a whole range of different things can be in your budget, within the sort of parameters of $20,000. The other thing to say is that you'll do two budgets, one for Plan A, one for Plan B. You want to make sure that the totals match, because if we approve your project, we want to be sure that you have enough money to switch between different approaches should conditions change. So that's the other thing to say. Yep. So look at the website if you want more information, and again, I'm happy to communicate with anyone, if you have questions about what you could include. And that takes me to project description 4. Why are you the right person to carry out this project? We're interested in how you've prepared yourself, your language competence, technical skills, previous research, other relevant experience, the work you've already done, how it relates to your other research, academic collaborators, how their role in the project relates to yours. But we're also, and this is, additional, we're interested in how you became committed to doing this work. Tell us about your background and your relationship to the community or communities affected by your work. And here is also a place where, we'll be able to tell from your answer what puts you in a position to assess changing risks associated with your research. So that's project description 4. Project description 5, what contribution will your project make to anthropology? Please note that the Foundation's mission is to support innovative research and researchers. We're interested in funding scholars who will do more than simply add to an existing body of knowledge. How will your project bring new insights to the field as a whole and help the discipline live up to its full potential? And this last question, it's, the answer is short, but it's deadly. It's, what's the point? You don't want to be too specific. You don't want to be overly broad. If you haven't talked about climate change, for example, at all in any of the other parts of your application, if you suddenly talk about it in your answer to project description 5, that won't fly. It's sort of what you say here needs to flow from what you said before. One way to approach this is, if your answer to question 1 starts broad with a broad question and then narrows in, your answer to this question could start narrow and then broadening outward to the broader implications of your work. So as a reviewer, the answers to this question that I find most engaging are where everything the person says makes sense in light of what I've seen before, but suddenly I'm able to see, whoa, I see this new way in which this is important. I see this new kind of conversation about a really different topic that's going to be informed by what this person is doing. So again, figuring out the sweet spot, how is it that you make a contribution? It's really by, having findings that resonate broadly beyond people who are interested in your particular topic. So that's the challenge of answering project description 5. So yeah, just some parting thoughts on our approach at this moment. We want to fund as much anthropological research as we can. And I've been really excited to see how flexible anthropologists have been worldwide in figuring out ways to go on with their work. We are committed to supporting precarious scholars, especially graduate students and recent graduates, are facing all sorts of obstacles in the current moment. I know that there are particular obstacles that are faced by, recent graduates, people without permanent positions in Europe. One of the questions that often comes up is, how much does previous sort of publication and so on matter for a Wenner-Gren application? And really not at all. Our reviewers are instructed to evaluate proposals on the basis of the proposal itself. We don't require anyone to have an institutional affiliation to apply. We fund individuals, not institutions. So, I think that this is a resource. I would like to see more applications coming from precarious scholars based in Europe, because I think we're not constrained in ways that some of the European funders are. We have an ethical obligation to those affected by our research that we're feeling very strongly. And we really want to support people who also feel this strongly. we're taking a long view that this is just one moment in a longer history for both researchers and the discipline. You know, I'm really excited to see what anthropology is going to look like a year from now or 2 years from now. The ways in which this period has transformed the field, I think could be quite exciting. And, you know, just personally, I'm just really excited to be in this role right now because I'm learning so much from the sorts of things our applicants are setting out to do. You know, it just seems like a really great opportunity at the moment to be doing exciting research that's going to really make a difference. So I want to say a little bit about our other programs. This is kind of, you know, the specific parts of our mission: advancing knowledge, addressing precarity, amplifying impact, fostering inclusion. Again, this is all on our website if you want to take a look. And it really guides us in all of our programs, you know, both in designing programs and the way that we think about the review process. So Hunt Fellowships, we have postdoctoral fellowships. They're 1 year. And again, you don't have to have an affiliation. Please look into these if you're at all interested in finding support for a writing project. Theos Fellowship for Ethnographic Film. For any of you who are ethnographic filmmakers, this again, it's a 1 year fellowship to bring to completion a film or media project. Wadsworth International Fellowship. These fellowships support students, graduate students from places where, you know, anthropology graduate programs are harder to access to attend established programs. This is also something to think about if you're actually working in an established program and would like to find ways to support early career graduate students. The Wadsworth African is for students studying at South African universities. Conference and workshop grants. We've been supporting mostly virtual events so far. We're beginning to approve some in-person events, you know, being held actually quite far out towards the end of 2021, early 2022. And the next deadline for that, that's a mistake, should be June 1st. So if you're interested in that, check out our website, you know, feel free to reach out. Wenner-Gren Symposia, these are Wenner-Gren hosted events where we bring together scholars from around the world, from different kinds of backgrounds and disciplines to talk about exciting and pressing issues in the field. Right now, we're prioritizing symposia that bring together anthropologists with, you know, with scholars from fields with which, you know, anthropologists haven't traditionally been in conversation. So the next one is the price of wealth. It's equal numbers of, you know, economists and anthropologists talking about inequality. We're excited about that. After that, populism, anthropological approaches. The next deadline for letters of intent is October 1st, 2021. If you have an idea you'd like to propose, we'd love to hear from you. And we have Current Anthropology, which is our journal, our 4-field journal, edited by Lawrence Ralph. Sapiens, our magazine for non-anthropologists. If you're interested in writing for non-anthropologists, we would love to get pitches from you. You should check out the Sapiens website. We have a historical archives program where we're kind of, you know, work with people to provide funding to prepare research materials for deposition in archives. And we've been doing a bunch of public conversations this year. I mean, like, I think everyone, but, you know, Wenner-Gren, it's been an exciting time for us. Early kind of webinars on anti-Blackness, you know, a collaboration with the Society of Black Archaeologists and the Indigenous Archaeology Collective, you know, around issues in archaeology and memory and who tells stories about the past. We've also been sponsoring Disciplinary Conversations. You know, we had a webinar program for webinars on the future of anthropological research, and a lot of exciting events came out of that. Most of them are recorded and available on our blog, so please feel free to check that out. The Case for Letting Anthropology Burn, you know, was an event that was really looking critically at the tradition of American anthropology. Here are some of our new programs. The first deadline is August 1st, 2021. Our engaged research grants will be grants of the same size as our dissertation fieldwork and post-PhD research grant programs. And these are for research partnerships that empower those who have historically been among those researched in anthropology rather than the researchers themselves. So we're really looking to support projects that are collaborative from the get-go. And again, thinking about the kind of ethical demands of the moment. This is a program that was in the works before the pandemic, but I just feel like after 2020, it's really particularly needed. So if you're at all interested in this, please feel free to reach out, check out our website. If you have questions, feel free to contact me. We're going to be doing a series of webinars on these, some co-hosted by colleagues in the Global South. I'm also planning to do a more general webinar, at different times of day for different time zones in June. So, keep an eye on our blog if you're at all interested in these grants. Global Initiatives grants, we're coming into the second round. These are to support innovative, collaborative initiatives that build capacity in anthropology. At our first deadline, we supported projects addressing the impact of COVID-19 on anthropology. The thematic priority for the next deadline will be racial justice in anthropology. But again, we accept on a whole range of topics. It's just simply, this is kind of our priority. We're going to be looking to fund some projects in that field. Wondergrad Seminars, a new program. We had to put the launch on hold because of the pandemic, but these are, for workshops that are designed to foster intergenerational engagement around issues central to the discipline. The next deadline for letters of intent is April 1. If you have any questions about this, feel free to reach out to me. Donna Austin, our conference fellow, also can answer your questions. And last but not least, the Sapiens Public Fellowship. It's a 2-year internship with our magazine for non-anthropologists that helps recent PhDs build careers in public media and science communication. The next deadline is March 2021. Sapiens is a fully virtual operation. It has been from the start. So, we would welcome applicants from all over the world for this fellowship. And that's it. So I'm going to stop sharing and open the floor to any questions anyone might have.
Thank you so much, Danlin. I think that was just a wonderful overview of the whole Wenner-Gren program that you offer. And there were many elements I think that are particularly exciting and interesting for us in Italy. We do have a situation, there's a big conversation about precarious scholars here, and I appreciated your emphasis on the attention to precarious scholars. And also this is, for example, the Engaged Research Grants program sounds really exciting. And we do have a lot of researchers here who are moving exactly in this direction with their work. I believe Elena is fielding the questions. We can see if any have come in yet with the raised hands. Elena, I'm not seeing raised hands, but maybe you are.
No, at the moment I have to check, but I would say that the list.
Pump up the volume, Elena.
Dimmi, Francesco, yes?
So.
Thank you very much.
If there aren't any questions yet from our audience, I actually have a couple. First of all, do you have, there's someone who's, in the chat who's asking, okay, well, I'll hold off then and give priority to our person in the chat, Copertino.
Yes, Domenico?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rato, for this presentation. Normally, we assist to such kind of presentations, but with a wider audience. So this is just for anthropologists, and this narrows our possibilities. I mean, this is better than listening to wider presentation and possibilities for this application. So thank you. And so you just one question about who is preferred as a proponent for the project. You said that you found individuals and not institutions, but is our teamwork project allowed to for the applications? Or
Yes.
just individual projects? And then and just another question, are young researchers preferred than older ones. I mean, if I am a professor and I want to have a project that can be pursued with my younger collaborators, is this admissible? Or is better than maybe one a PhD, somebody who earned his or her PhD would present his project? I mean, which way is preferable?
Yeah, thanks so much for that question. The first question, we definitely fund collaborative projects. You know, so often people will kind of like include, I mean, there's space within the application to talk about collaborators. Just for our administrative purposes, one person needs to be the person who receives the money and is responsible for the reporting. But we're definitely, you know, support collaborative projects. And we're in the midst of switching our grant management system and redesigning our applications and doing a bunch of stuff. But, you know, we're going to try to kind of make that really clear to people. And we will, if your institution is like, no, you can't get a grant unless the money gets sent through our application office, you know, we'll do that. We won't pay them overhead though. So sometimes they're not happy about that, you know. But I guess the point I'm making in sort of saying that is you don't have to be affiliated with an institution to apply for us, right? So you could be doing a collaborative project as, you know, an independent scholar with other independent scholars, and you could still apply to us for funding. We would be happy to, you know, fund that project. You just would need to choose one of you to be the kind of point person who actually receives the money and is responsible for the reporting back. So it's kind of more of a matter of division of labor administratively, you know, than necessarily a kind of PI versus assistance kind of, you know, situation. In terms of like who to apply, I mean, our post-PhD research grants, you know, I've been informed that they're kind of poorly like worded because people assume that senior scholars can't apply to them, and they absolutely can. You know, we fund emeritus scholars in that program. So anyone is really open to apply for the post-PhD research grant program. In terms of your question, like who should do the applying if it's a collaborative project? I don't know. I mean, I would think about like, what's the nature of the collaboration? You know, how equal is the collaboration, right? You know, is this sort of a situation in which, you know, the parties are all contributing kind of ideas towards it, right? You know, and kind of like think about, you know, where's the center of gravity, right? That would be maybe the best consideration, you know, for me. It's not like, you know, if it's from a junior person, you're automatically advantaged. You know, that's not really kind of the way it works. We really try to judge proposals on the basis of the proposal. And if this is an exciting project that's bringing together more senior anthropologists with junior anthropologists and everyone is contributing to doing exciting work, you know, I don't think it matters quite as much if it's a senior or a junior person. The one thing I will say is dissertation fieldwork grants, you know, if it's someone who would be applying for a dissertation fieldwork grant, it would need to be pretty clear that this is research that's going to help that person get through their PhD, get their degree, that's really going to be their research, you know? So, you know, if you had a graduate student on the team and you're thinking, well, you know, maybe we'd have an advantage if we applied for this as a dissertation fieldwork grant, our reviewers are pretty savvy about it. So it really need to be kind of the ideas, the heart of the work, and the credit for the work was very clearly going to be going to the graduate student. Yeah, so, you know, again, there might be a little bit of temptation to game it because, you know, we've been doing a lot of statistical analysis. Historically, we've been extremely poor at funding people based in institutions in the global South, a little bit better with Europe, but not as good as we should be. So, and the dissertation fieldwork grant in particular has been, you know, kind of really uneven. You might think, oh, well, it's great to have an Italian graduate student apply, but then at the same time, there is sort of that issue, right? And I have seen recent reviewers looking at a project and saying, this seems to be like a tiny element of the person's advisor's project and not really something that this person is going to own themselves, and being a little bit hesitant about supporting that kind of work. Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Great, thank you, Domenico, for the question. And let's see if something else has come in the meantime with the raised hands. Elena or Tamara, have you seen any hands?
Actually, I have a question. Can I raise
Sure.
my own hand? In one of the first slides, you showed a sort of a priority topic, which is kind of obvious given the moment, which is the COVID-19 entry into the research topics, right? This, on one hand, this is pretty much understandable. It's an urgency. It's actually.
Elena, parla più forte, per favore.
Yes. Can you hear me well? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can
Right.
hear you.
Okay. And right. And but I would like to know whether this can be kind of considered like a background element, because now this is a feature of the world we're living in. So any research is against that sort of scenario. Okay. Or this means that there's a sort of priority, understandable in a way, for medical anthropology or for this type
Right.
of context. Maybe this is just a temporary priority, which could be perfectly logic to understand. Just
Yes.
to explain.
Yeah, actually, let me share my screen again just to be sure that there weren't misunderstandings. Because, yeah, this question totally has come up, before, right? And I can see the sort of, that we're only ever going to fund anything on COVID-19. And that's actually not really true. I mean, I think it's a title, Funding Anthropological Research in the Age of COVID-19. Or
no, it wasn't just that. I think.
Yeah. So it's sort of like, this is the context in which we're acting. We're funding in the context of 2020. And I don't know about you, but I'm always like, when will we know that this is over? It's really not clear.
Exactly.
This is kind of with us for a while. But that does not mean, and it didn't even mean at the beginning, that we were prioritizing work on COVID-19. We are prioritizing work that was designed with reference in the context of what the pandemic is doing to the conditions under which anthropologists operate and the people affected by their research live, right? In some cases, that means that research on COVID-19 is going to be the most meaningful thing for everyone involved. But in other cases, it's not. There are many, many beautiful and fragile things in the world that are under threat that people care about deeply that don't have anything to do with COVID-19. And we also want to support work on those sorts of issues. In terms of supporting themes, within our dissertation fieldwork and our post-PhD research grant programs, which are our biggest ones by far, we've never prioritized themes. We always, it's the grants, the way I think about it is our grants are empty boxes that get filled with whatever exciting work is being done in the discipline right now. So we don't prioritize work on, cities, for example, this year, or environmental anthropology another year. We don't do that. We really are looking for exciting work, surprising work, things that we've not even thought of that are really exciting themes for research. Now, I mentioned the Global Initiatives Grant, which is a little bit different. That's kind of like the one part of our budget where we're trying to think about how can we be nimble and respond to things that are challenges to the discipline right now, broad challenges. So, at that moment, it really made sense as anthropologists were scrambling, like how to proceed in this moment. It kind of made sense to support capacity building projects in that front. In this moment of, reckoning with racial injustice, I feel like it makes sense to sort of support projects that are trying to do something, build capacity, go beyond simply having conversations at that point. But it's a relatively small part of our budget, and we'll definitely accept proposals on all sorts of things. It's just, at this point, we're kind of, when we're looking at the pool and we're trying to narrow it down, it's like all things being equal, projects that are addressing those themes, will be the ones that we'll, perhaps take a closer look at. But that has nothing to do with our research grant programs or our conferences and workshops. All of those things are really open, or our fellowship programs. We don't try to engineer the discipline, right? We try to see.
No, it was just, it would also make sense, like to have a schedule, but.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Thanks very much.
Sure.
If there isn't another question that's arrived in the meantime, because I'm not able to see the hands raised. I wanted to ask something you probably address very much more in depth if you are doing workshops on proposal writing. Can you say, Lisa, something about the evaluation criteria of your reviewers? And also, is there a possibility to see proposals that have been funded as samples?
Yeah, those are really good questions. I mean, the evaluation criteria, include, like, first of all, and it's really actually the things that I did sort of address when I was talking about what makes a good proposal. They're looking for proposals that are focused, right? It's clear that there's one research question and it's a question that empirical research can answer. They're looking for projects that are feasible, that can be successfully completed in that amount of time. And they're looking for projects that are legible, right? And again, just recognizing that reviewers are coming from different kinds of fields. Yeah, so all of those things are really important. And I think that pretty much covers, the sorts of things that they're trying to find, right?
Maybe also impact, the potential impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And the importance of the work in changing the conversation, right? So to what degree is this work really going to contribute something new and exciting? Yep. So yeah, no, absolutely. And again, if you look at our questions, our application is really designed in a way that sort of shows you what we're looking for, right? In a way, there's some granting agencies that just say, give us a proposal, and they don't really tell you exactly what they want. We're really clear about what you want, and the idea that you have a question, it's a question that's coming out of a conversation, right? So that, you've been listening in on the conversation, you recognize anthropology is a team sport, you're drawing on other people's insights, right? And you're figuring out ways to move the conversation forward by bringing things together in a new way. Your methods respond to the questions. It's integrated in that way. That means it's feasible and you can actually address these questions. You're the right person to be doing this work, your preparation, your background, your commitments. And then finally, question 5, the work is going to have an impact. People beyond your own narrow circle are going to, learn something from the work that you're doing. So really the criteria are built into the application, I guess, is, what I'd say. It's very competitive, but, I feel like when you look at the projects that get funded, it's the ones that are really able to kind of put together an integrated description of what they want to do and to be doing something that has kind of a spark and passion, right? That it's not simply repeating something that somebody else is doing. It's really doing something that's, my reaction would always be like, wow, I never thought of that, but it makes total sense why this would be super interesting, So that kind of balance between being part of a conversation, knowing a literature, being part of a tradition, but then adding something new.
Being innovative. And the second part of my question about being able to see things that have been funded.
Yes, exactly. Well, this is something we're doing a bunch of work around diversity, equity, inclusion. Right now, we're doing a massive survey. We're going to be starting to do double-blind reviewing and collecting a lot more demographic information. But also as part of that, we're asking past grantees and reviewers who have been grantees whether they would be willing to contribute their funding proposals to an online searchable repository, right?
Okay.
Set up in collaboration with an organization that focuses on archaeology, but they're open to all different fields of anthropology. So you would be able to kind of go in and search by theme and look at proposals, that have been funded in this. The idea right now would be to include not just the successful proposal, but maybe the first submission, so you can see how.
Wow, the development.
Yeah, you can see the development. If you apply and don't get funding the first time, you get all of the feedback. So if you make it to stage 2, you'll have 4 pieces of feedback, the first reviewer and then the 3 who looked at it. We look very carefully at that feedback, and really look for people who provide helpful feedback to the applicants. If you apply the second time, you get 1,000 more words to explain how you've changed your proposal in reaction to the feedback. clarified things that maybe weren't clear, and so on, right? So you can, I think that this will be a really great resource. This is something that's been bothering me for a while. I mean, I think historically we've been hesitant to share successful proposals because we didn't want people just to think, if I just imitate this, then that'll be a good project, right? We really want people to put things together in new and surprising ways. But I'm also realizing increasingly that some of the inequity and imbalance in funding really has to do with the fact that students who are in departments with a strong tradition of grant writing for Wenner-Gren are more likely to get Wenner-Gren.
Yeah.
Like we did an analysis of our data, and one of the determinants of whether or not your proposal will get funding is whether someone else in your department gets funding that year, so it's like.
Yeah, there's another factor I would add to this, which I think would be really relevant to Italy, writing style. There is a very different writing style traditionally in Italy, and I think proposal writing is its own genre. And I think having some examples would be really, really helpful also to level some of the geographic imbalance.
Absolutely, that's absolutely true. In departments that have established, like in the US, proposal writing classes, you're seeing your fellow classmates' proposals, you're seeing successful proposals from the class. It's a huge advantage.
Right.
So this is something that we're working on and hoping to roll out by November of next year, depending on how many people say. So far, most of the people we've invited to contribute things have said yes. And then going forward, every time we fund people, we would ask to submit it. So, yeah.
In the meantime, a question came in from Emanuela Bornino in the chat. She says, I have questions about the Hunt postdoctoral fellowships writing towards the writing up of already completed research. Does the final research, not the proposal, need to be written in English? Does the candidate need to provide an already signed publishing contract?
Okay, that's a great question. No, the final work does not need to be written in English. The proposal needs to be in English, but the work can be in whatever language is appropriate for your, context, for the impact you want to make. And you do not need to have an already signed publishing contract. When our reviewers are looking at applications for this, they're trying to think about how far along is this person. If you do have a contract or a pre-contract, saying something about it in your application is helpful, just for them knowing that this person will be able to complete the project in 1 year, but it's not a requirement for getting the grant. People get the grant without already having a contract. I think people almost differ. I mean, I've never submitted I've never gotten a contract until I had a book finished. I just don't do that. I don't know how to talk about my work until it's done. So, we do not we're not biased against people who don't already have contracts.
Okay, this is great. Further questions from our audience?
I received the question in the chat, but privately, I don't know why. And the question is how long after I failed an application should I resubmit my application again? Meaning, is there an interval after a rejected application that one should wait before applying again?
No, just if you're ready at the time of the next deadline, feel free to apply again. We work very hard to have the decisions out at the very shortest time. I think we say 2 weeks. I've never seen us come closer than 3 weeks, and we try to get the results out a month before the next deadline so people have time to resubmit. Again, and if you're declined at stage 1, you'll have like 3 months to resubmit, right? You'll have more time to rewrite your proposal. But yeah, you're totally free to apply at the next deadline, and many people do. Yeah.
I have another question. I'm curious, how do you select your reviewers? Or on the other hand, how could somebody become a reviewer? There might be people in the audience.
A reviewer, please contact me. And Michael Muse is our staff member who kind of oversees reviewer recruitment. Michael and I work very closely on this. We sit down together and make lists of individuals who we've encountered. We also reach out to our networks and try to reach beyond our networks to find people to be reviewers. We try to have like a coverage of the different topics that are being proposed by our applicants, the different regions of the world where people work, but we're also working very hard to have a very diverse reviewer pool. So we have significant numbers of reviewers who are based in the Global South, who are based outside of the United States. The kind of people we're looking for are people who are curious, like curious about all kinds of research. You know, they both have expertise in their own area, but they're happy to review a proposal on something else. You know, they just have a sense of what good research looks like. And people who are intellectually generous. You know, it's really important when you're reviewing to be able to kind of like give a fair shake to someone whose sort of theoretical background may be different from your own, who may be asking questions, and yet they're still compelling within their context. So, and people who give, you know, generous feedback, right? So we have a very, I mean, we spend a lot of time on this, both recruitment, keeping lists of people to recruit. We also spend a bunch of time looking at the feedback, evaluating the evaluators. So when we get the stage 1 reviews in, I look at every single piece of feedback. I look at every single abstract. You know, we do some editing, right? And, you know, we think about, is this someone who we want to continue to work with? Or maybe this is someone who we try to provide feedback. We're just starting, but we're doing onboarding for new reviewers. And we're starting last fall, we're doing a reviewer meeting every year just to talk about, you know, questions of bias, patterns in the reviews. So I don't know, there's a joke in the funding world that if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money. You know, we can't provide everyone with money, but we try to provide everyone with advice. So if you've been through your process, you've at least benefited in some way from it. So, but yeah, if any of you in this group are interested in reviewing for us, we're always eager to collect names. I've done like proposal reviewing workshops at international conferences and, you know, come upon some of our best reviewers that way. We senior scholars, junior scholars, you know, just a whole range of people, just people who are experts in their field, intellectually curious, and just kind of generous human beings. Those are the people that we're looking for.
Great. Thanks for that backstage on the reviewing. Any further questions? I think we're pretty much drawing to a close here in terms of the time. In Italy, it's getting a little late for some people, and but I think we would have space for one more question. If not, I really heartily thank Danilyn Rutherford for her generous time and sharing her knowledge and expertise about Wenner-Gren and the various programs. And I really hope that this has sparked our anthropological public here in Italy to think in terms of developing some great applications. And it would be really super to see some things developing out of this conversation with you. So,
well, I'd be excited to get some proposals from all of you. So that would be great. Yep. Super. Thank you so much. And again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks to our audience.
So early for you in the morning, because we have also been dealing with.
No, it's not so bad. I think I have it easier than you guys.
No, but you accepted when it was much earlier. So we were feeling kind of.
Okay. Take care.
So thanks also from my little side. And I think, Dorothy, we can close.
Yes. Yes. Thank you again. And the recording will also be available on our YouTube channel. So.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, and best wishes. I think we can turn the recording off. Ciao, Gabriele. Ciao, Vincenzo.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. a precious webinar this evening. Thank you
Quando
very
ti
much.
compri un microfono funzionante facciamo una festa.
Per cosa?
Si sente un cavolo quando parli, non si sente